Today is the second RC passage we will be discussing from the Wiley Cat VRC book, the concept review section, chapter 5, reading task 2. This passage has been taken from CAT 2007. This passage is written in a literary style, more in poetic language than prose. This is what most students are unfamiliar with, and this poses difficulties. There is a lot of symbolism and use of metaphor which escape the understanding of many students. So let us actually read the passage, the first para of the passage, and see how it goes. Every civilized society lives and thrives on a silent but profound agreement as to what is to be accepted as the valid mold of experience. Now, what does valid mold of experience mean? It means a set of values that have been evolved in that civilization based on experience. They have seen that if there is loyalty within a family, the whole society works better. If there's respect for elders, you love thy neighbor as yourself, you work for the community as a whole. These are part of a value system of a society. So each civilized society has such an understanding among the people that these are the value systems that bind us together. Let's move further. Civilization is a complex system of dams, dikes, and canals, warding off, directing, and articulating the influx of the surrounding fluid element. A fertile fenland elaborately drained and protected from the high tides of chaotic, unexercised, and inarticulate experience. Now, what are these chaotic, unexercised, inarticulate experience? These are the ones which go against the valid mold of experience. So what are going against your value system are things like there are people who are committing evil acts. There is, let's say, extramarital relationships taking place, uh, telling of lies, any lust for power. So, all such chaotic, unexercised, inarticulate experience don't fit into the valid mold of experience. So, the civilization has evolved a method whereby you stop all these evil and wrong things or those things against that go against your value system, and canals to divert, to wash them away from your society and throw them in the sea that is beyond your shores. So a civilization has their own method of getting rid of all the waste and all the gandh in society out from the within the value system of the to preserve the value system of the society. So all that is drained out, and you're protected also from anything from outside, from the sea coming onto the land, from the high tides, from the sea coming onto the land. So you protect your land against such evil or immoral behavior or experience that tends to corrupt your shores. So this is how it starts. Then it calls such a society, such a culture, in such a culture, stable and sure of itself. So it is protecting its value system. It has insulated itself against all wrong influences or bad influences from outside. So within the frontiers of naturalized experience, now in such a society, what do the artists do? The artists see that the value system, uh, there is a limited life view, limited world view. So how do they exercise their creative power? So the arts wield their creative power not so much in width, That means there are not so many wide subjects to choose from, because the society is, let's say, orthodox, religious. So you can choose religious subjects. You can maybe choose beauty of nature, beauty of the human body, maybe to some extent. So the subject matter is limited. So artists within those limited subjects, then they go in depth. They try to see the same topic from different perspectives. So they do not create new experience, but deepen and purify the old. So there is, artist cannot come up in his creative work with some new experience. Let's say a homosexual relationship being shown, two men in a, let's say, gentle embrace, right, depicting homosexual love. That certainly will not fit into the valid mold of experience of the society. Such thing will be drained out and thrown out from the society. So they can't make a painting of that sort. But if there are people who, let's say, have deep devotion and respect for Mother Mary, the mother of Jesus, then they will bring out different aspects of, let's say, that same experience. So their works do not differ from one another like a new horizon from a new horizon, but like a Madonna from a Madonna. So one painter has made a painting of, let's say, Mother Mary, the mother of Jesus, and shows her, let's say, purity and simplicity. Another painter makes another painting showing her as a symbol of motherhood, right? The love uh, that comes out for children from a face. So this is going into depth. There is no new topic being chosen. The topic is the same, Mother Mary. So now this appeals to the people because people would love to see such paintings, because their devotion and their respect for Mother Mary will find an expression. So let's move on to the second para now. Let us read the second para. The periods of art which are most vigorous in creative passion seem to occur when the established pattern of experience, that is, that valid mold of experience, the fixed value system, loosens its rigidity. So we are talking of the same society which was once orthodox and rigid in its value system, is now becoming more liberal, relaxing a bit, but without losing the very essence of its morality. So without losing its force. So European society, from a deeply religious Orthodox society, gradually over time became more relaxed, less rigid. The artists got greater latitude to explore different topics. Such a period was the Renaissance, and Shakespeare its poetic consummation. So Shakespeare contributed most to that flowering of culture that took place during the Renaissance in Europe. So it was as if when the Renaissance happened, it is as if the discipline of the old order had given way to the excitement of breaking away from that the rigidity of the orthodoxy earlier, and uh, now they were willing to explore and go adventures and explore the experiences which earlier were taboo and forbidden. So adventurers of experience set out as though in lifeboats to rescue and bring back to the shores treasures of knowing and feeling which the old order had left floating on the high seas. So let's say a story like Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, which was earlier taboo and forbidden because it was about lust of power and lust for a woman who guides his man to still gets him to kill the king. So, such kind of evil that is shown in Macbeth, that was certainly not acceptable. It was more like the work of the devil. So, that now Shakespeare went in his boat from the shore into the sea. The story had been thrown away and nobody was willing to look at it. He picked up that story and dramatized and created a play out of it. So he was an adventurer of experience who rescued such a beautiful story, such a story that explains human frailties and human motives, all kinds, without being too moralistic at every step over it, right? So the old order had rejected it, but now in the Renaissance, those same forbidden topics were picked up and given a new life, revitalized. So the works of the early Renaissance and the poetry of Shakespeare vibrate with the compassion for life experience in danger of dying from exposure and neglect. Had Shakespeare and other people not picked up such stories, they would have been forgotten. Now, Shakespeare looked at it with compassion. He knew that humans are not perfect. They are not rigid, perfect moral beings, right? As if made in the image of God. They have weaknesses. They want power. They lust for uh, greater, let's say, wealth. And women become a driving force, and they are willing to commit evil to get power. So this compassion for such, let's say, weaknesses and frailties of human beings, such negative emotions or evil emotions that are very much part of human nature, he brought that to life. He gave it an existence so that people accept that such things actually exist. You can't just neglect it under your high moral, let's say, facade that you've created around you. Now, in this compassion, so he's being compassionate about that, weakness in human beings. In this compassion was the creative genius of the age. So, in the Renaissance period, this compassion for those things which earlier were forbidden gave new life to those earlier, the past experiences which were neglected. Yet it was a genius of courage. Now, you needed courage to do this because the valid mold of experience had only loosened its rigidity, but it was very much still, let's say, accepted as uh, nobody rejected that experience, the valid mold, the value system that existed. So it required courage to, let's say, go against it, but it was not desperate audacity. It was not total rebellion because, after all, Shakespeare knew that the same story has to be acceptable and fit within the value system that exists. He can't totally break away from it. So, however elusively, this, let's say, genius still knew of harbors and anchors, of homes to which to return, and of bonds in which to store the harvest. So, which means it still knew of the value system of the society to which it must return. That is why all the tragedies of Shakespeare end in tragedy for those weak and frail, those evil and people who show those weaknesses, right? He can't show them as winning. He can't show evil triumph over good because that doesn't fit into the value system. So the exploring spirit of art was in the depth of its consciousness still aware. It was still aware that there's a value system, there's a scheme of things into which to fit its exploits and creations. So in the first two paras, first we've seen the European society as an orthodox, rigid society. Second para shows that during the Renaissance period, how that same society had gradually relaxed a bit. The morality was not so rigidly imposed or, let's say, exercised. The rigidity had gone, yet the force of it still existed. So it gave a lot of latitude for people like Shakespeare and other artists and creative people to use that latitude given to them to come up with greater creativity. The hallmark was which was compassion for human emotions, human weaknesses that must be accepted rather than living in denial of them, rather than just treating it as taboo subjects, So now we'll go on to the next para. So now the third para talks of a further relaxation of things. So the more the scheme of things, that means this value system loses its stability. Stable, the word stable is related to land. So there's the constant metaphor of land, right, as being stable. Sea, obviously, because of the waves, is unstable. So the more boundless and uncharted appears the ocean of potential exploration. So in the Renaissance, Shakespeare went in a boat, rescued all the waste that had been thrown onto the sea, which was floating there, picked them up, came back on the land, and created those beautiful plays that still excite us. And now, as society evolved, as religion lost its hold on people, science came about, so the whole value system got diluted, and suddenly you found that artists found that they could explore any topic on earth. Nothing was taboo, nothing was forbidden. So, in the blank confusion of infinite potentialities, so now the artists were confused. Earlier, they had limited things to choose from, so they went about their job. Now, the potentialities were infinite. There was nothing stopping them. There was no value system to guide them. They were lost. So, flotsam, the things that are floating, and jetsam. Jetsam is what you throw from a plane and which is on the sea. Flotsam is what ships throw on the sea and is floating. So, all waste matter that is floating is all available for the artists and infinite ways to combine them. Because now everything, so virtually society has shifted from land onto the sea. So now the sea represents that third stage of European society, which is totally liberal, totally open, with no moral system guiding, no control of religion, which binds anybody to anything. Children, families are breaking up. The institution of family is threatened. There is no community feeling as such. Everybody is doing his bit. Young people are into drugs, uh, and they're going around all over the world, having living in nudist camps on beaches, uh, taking drugs, and indulging in free sex. So that is the kind of third stage of society where everything is at sea. Everything is sea and everything is at sea. That means there's no land. Land represents a stable culture, sea represents the unstable culture. So the sea is all about us. The sea is the land's edge also, the granite into which it reaches. So the sea reaches in some, let's say, land, but that is another culture now. Your culture is now at sea. The beaches where it tossed its hints of earlier and other creations. So, but today that society is at sea, it is unstable, and people are doing whatever they feel like. Now, in such a case, what is the role of artists? Finally, the whole thing is that in this passage, now we've seen two stages of that same society. Now it has turned into a third stage where it's totally at sea, totally unstable. Let us see what happens and what is the role of an artist in that. So the last para now, and Rilke tells a story in which, as in T.S. Eliot's poem, it is again the sea and the distance of other creation that becomes the image of a poet's reality. So what is a poet's reality in a place like this, where there is sea, there is no value? Now the other creation, the distance. So anything of value, there's nothing of value. People value nothing. So there's no value system guiding them. They don't value love, they don't value friendship, they don't value trust. So when all human values are gone, you are at sea. That's culture is just living like maybe a stage of animals or something. But there are other lands which are at a distance, which there are values. Now, what is the poet's reality in such a society? What does the poet have to contribute in such a society? So a rowing boat sets out on a difficult passage. The oarmen labor in exact rhythm. There is no sign yet of destination, so nobody knows where they're going. So life is aimless in such an unstable society. Suddenly, a man, seemingly idle, breaks out into song. So that is that artist, the singer, the poet, and others are just moving around aimlessly, meaninglessly through life. It is the idle singer who magically conquers the despair. So people are despairing because there's nothing to guide them, nothing to look forward to, no meaning in life. So that does not give them any hope. They are despairing of the aimlessness of their lives. The idle singer, he comes up and tries to give them some meaning to their life. So while the people next to him try to come to grip with the elements that is next to them, his voice seems to bind the boat to the farthest distance, so that the farthest distance draws it towards itself. So let's say he sings a poem about love or friendship, right? Now, the oarsmen, the other people who are the people in that society who are leading an aimless, meaningless life, they suddenly find, yes, he is offering something. He has some, meaning to offer to us. So I don't know why or how is Rilke's conclusion, but suddenly I understand the situation of the poet, his place and function in this age. So, in such an age, when the society is unstable, at sea, aimless, meaningless, no values, it is the artist whose role is and whose function is that through his experiences, sharing his experiences gives some value, give some meaning to our lives and our emotions, and give some direction in which we can go. So it does not matter if one denies him every place except this one. That means the artist should be given this place that he is the guy now who's going to guide us in a valueless society by giving us, showing us some values and some meaning to life. And that in that role we must tolerate these our artists. So this is how the passage ends. Three stages of a culture with loosening value systems, and thereby artists having greater uh, freedom of subject matter, of unleashing, expressing their creative genius. And the last phase is the creative genius has unlimited potentialities. So I thought this was a beautiful passage, but somehow this passage was lost in uh, all these past years, CAD papers, etc. Nobody has got the flavor of this passage. So I thought I will put this in the book so that we can discuss this fully. Let us now see the RC questions. Okay, the very first questions ask the author employs the metaphor of land and sea to distinguish which of the following. So obviously land represents stable fixed value system, valid mold of experience. Sea represents instability, infinite potentialities, open, no boundaries, uh, meaningless, aimless. So obviously civilized, uncivilized. Now, uncivilized is not something, civilized may be, stabilized uh, and we are not talking of regions, we are talking of cultures. So obviously the option answer is two, stable cultures. Land is the metaphor for stable cultures, and sea is the metaphor for the unstable cultures, which is there in the third and fourth para. Let's see other options. Actual experience, potential experience, no, this is wrong. Known regions and uncharted, unexplored ones. So this is not. We are talking of value systems, stability given to a culture by its value system. So answer of one is two. What is the primary purpose of the author? Highlight that the Renaissance saw the flowering of true creative genius. Well, to some extent, this showed. He talked about Renaissance and how the creative genius emerged there. But this is not the primary purpose, because there's a whole long passage with three different stages of three different cultures being spoken, underscore the place and position of poet in today's society. But that's only in the last para, in today's society, in the sense, in that third stage of society when you're at sea. Describe the role of artists in three distinct cultures of society. So obviously, three is the answer, because there were three distinct uh, cultures that we talked about. Establish a causal link between the type of culture and artistic expression. Yes, to some extent, type of culture limits the subjects and limits your creativity, but there's no causal link being established. Let's move on further. Question 3. What does the expression differ from one another, like a Madonna from a Madonna, allude to? Allude means indirectly refer to. So option 1 says the difference between width and depth of creative power. Now this is an option trap, because what that expression is actually saying, that there is no width, there's only depth. There's only a Madonna and another Madonna. So like one Madonna from another. So artistic work don't are on, there's no width of subjects, there's only depth of that creative expression. You're only giving different interpretation, different perspectives to a particular subject. So naturally 2 is the correct answer, the difference between two artistic interpretations of the same subject. The third and fourth don't fit in. Let's go to question 4. Why do arts wield their creative power not so much in width as in depth, in a culture stable and sure of itself? Now here comes that. How is this linked? If a culture is stable and sure of itself, why should creative power have limited subjects to choose from? So it can't go wide, it can only go deep. So which would be the correct answer? Let's go see. A stable society based on a fixed value system hardly offers freedom to artists to explore new subjects, because they have to stay within that rigid framework. So one clearly is the reason. So option 4, 1 is the answer. Let's see other options. Artists are not really encouraged to be creative in a stable society. No, they can be creative, but on those limited subjects. The choice of subjects for artists is limited to religious subjects in an orthodox and religious society. So this is again an option trap. It's not just religious subject. Just because the example of Madonna is given doesn't mean that artists cannot paint, let's say, a landscape, right? Or just beauty of flowers or something. Okay. A stable society is content within its frontiers of naturalized experience, that the arts do not have much appeal. This again is wrong, because art has always had an appeal. That's not what the passage is saying in any case. Let's move further. Question 5. What can be inferred from the statement? Adventurers of experience set out as though in lifeboats to rescue and bring back to the shores treasures of knowing and feeling which the old order had left floating on the high seas. So, people like Shakespeare and other poets and artists, they took whatever forbidden topics that were drained away from the land and thrown into the sea and was floating there. So they went in boats, picked them up, got them back to land, revitalized them, and made great tragedies like, Macbeth, Hamlet, Othello, and the works. So poets and artists revitalized and enriched the past, which was rejected by the earlier Orthodox society, which now has given more latitude for adventurers of experience to go and explore them. So obviously, 1 is the answer to question 5. Let's see others. Poets and artists were excited about having new experiences. Yes, they were, but that's not, what, doesn't capture the whole idea. They plagiarized the rejected works of past artists. This is not what is suggested. It is only that now they had greater freedom to explore them. Poets and artists explored the high seas for adventure. What adventure? To fight against sharks or what? So this is being used in a metaphorical way. Now here you're talking as if you're, high seas for adventure. You're taking a literal meaning of sea here. So obviously the other options can be eliminated. Question 6. What can be inferred from this statement? The exploring spirit of art was in the depths of his consciousness, still aware of a scheme of things, still aware of that, the force of morality or the value system, which still existed, though it has become less rigid, but it hasn't vanished. Like it has not, it's not, everything is not at sea or everything is sea. We have not reached that stage yet during the Renaissance. So, during the Renaissance, the exploring spirit of art knew that morality still existed and it had to fit its creative genius within that scheme of thing. It could not totally be audacious, bold, and rebel against it fully or reject it fully. So let's see the options. Artists were free to explore subjects with courage but not audacity. Yes, this is kind of a literally lifted from the passage, but it doesn't, this is again an option trap. This is a question I have made, but I've copied what CAT examiners do. They try to repeat the same words so that you get attracted to such options. So whenever the words match with the passage, you should be very careful that this is an option trap. So one is clearly an option trap. Next, artists were compassionate to issues uh, which had earlier been rejected by the rigid orthodox society. Yes, but this line doesn't talk of that compassion. Otherwise, it's mentioned in the passage. Artists were wanton in their exploring spirit. This again is not suggested, right? They were not wavered, they were going about it with a certain purpose, with compassion, and knowing that they had to fit it within the scheme of things. So, 4 is what talks of fitting it within the scheme of things. Artists were aware that despite the freedom that they now enjoyed, society's value system still. So again, you see passage, the what we are inferring from the statement that says still aware of the scheme of things. Option 4 says society's value system still. That means it still existed and it put boundaries around the subject matter you could explore. You could not just have evil triumph over good. You can't show a bad man becoming wealthy and enjoying himself and leading a very let's say hedonistic lifestyle, and that's the way to be. So that is not a message that your creative work can leave behind. It will not be accepted. You have to fit it within the scheme of things. That is why all the tragic tragedies of Shakespeare, the protagonists, the central characters, all meet a bad end. Question 7. The role of artists in which three distinct types of cultures or societies have been discussed in the passage. So, a civilized culture, well, yes, culture with loosened rigidity of its value system, a culture where everything is at sea. So, this is again using metaphor kind of a thing. Let's see option 2, an orthodox culture, which is, let's say, rigid. So orthodox shows rigidity of value system. A somewhat liberal culture, that means rigidity loosened, greater freedom given, but yet scheme of things, the force of it still, you have to work within that. And a society when everything is sea and everything is at sea. So that is a completely free and open culture, which I think the Western culture of the 60s and 70s, when the flower people movement, the hippie culture, where people left their rich, uh, thriving careers and just left life. They just felt life was meaningless. That just pursuing wealth and success and all this had no meaning. So they just left and went all around the world, just relaxed on beaches, had drugs, and there was no value. They were in despair. They had no aim. They didn't know where they were going. So, two is what covers those three distinct types of cultures or societies as suggested in the passage. 8. The sea and other creation leads. So, Rilke reaches a conclusion because the last passage is about Rilke, how he tells you that we must tolerate the artist in this position where he's the only one there to give us meaning. When there's no meaning to life, there's no aim, there is no values to pursue. So obviously option one, it defines the place of the poet in his culture. So that is the role of the poet, that he's the one in such a culture when there's nothing to guide anyone, he's there to share, write some poetry, express some values which appeal to some people, make it appealing so that the sense of you have some direction to in which you want to go. So option of 8 is one. The other options do not fit in. So with this, we have come to the end of today's discussion. This passage was tough, but by partaking of such a passage and a discussion over it, you have widened your mind. When you read something similar, like Zat has a lot of poetry. Now, when you read those, now you look at it. Earlier, people leave poetry. Oh, poetry, it's like a taboo. It's like that orthodox culture, taboo subjects, right? So now you will at least approach poetry with compassion. You look at it and try to understand what that guy is trying to say, however symbolically, however vague, right, however confused he may be. So I think with this, today's discussion comes to an end. Thank you. My intention is to discuss all the difficult passages of Cat that I have, intentionally included in my book so that they are not lost. Just like, Shakespeare went to rescue in a lifeboat all that stuff that was forbidden and lying. Now, all the good passages of Cat where people have not understood their worth, those have been thrown aside. And all the easy passages are floating around, and people are doing, oh, Cat is easy, Cat is easy. They don't see all these good passages. They've not been shown the good passages. They've not been shown the goodness of these passages. So, my aim through this book was to tell you that CAT examiners over the past years have done an amazing job. They have picked up amazing passages from amazing sources and try to cultivate your mind, drive you. Once they give you something, then people work towards it. But here, even coaching centers didn't probably understand most of these passages, so they said, छोड़ो इसको बच्चे हमको नहीं समझ आता बच्चों को क्या आएगा. So that was just left as flotsam and jetsam on the sea till I came as an adventurer to rescue them and put them in Wiley's Cat VRC book. So I intend to discuss such passages through this series of my discussions. We have finished our second discussion. Thank you very much.